this is a gift. These are the things that you can do above and beyond that will be a blessing and leaving a legacy. Welcome to Before the Buzzer Conversations, real talk about death, legacy, and what matters most.
I'm Keith, a retired physician.
And I'm Michelle, his daughter, a broadcasting professor.
I'm not dying yet.
Thank God. But even in health, we know death will come, and we need to talk about it.
You know, it's important for parents and their adult children to have those conversations, Michelle.
But it's not always easy to talk about, and that's where we come in.
In this podcast, we'll talk together about what needs to be done before you pass, and provide practical ways for you to have these conversations with people in your life.
This is not about doom and gloom. It's about living with purpose, passing on what matters most, and finding peace, even in the unknown.
So before the buzzer sounds, let's have a conversation.
All right, we all know having a will, expressing your wishes about organ donation, will you be buried or cremated or composted? That's a thing. Those are all things we know we need to discuss.
Yes, it's a long list, isn't it? When a life ends.
Do you want to be composted? We haven't talked about that.
No, thank you very much.
No interest in being composted?
No.
Okay. Just thought I would ask. Yes, it is a long list. I mean, there's so many things to think about, and this checklist of things that you want to make sure you do right to honor your family member that's passed. And, you know, we laugh about composting, but that is actually a thing. And people do have strong opinions on if they want to be cremated or buried, and if they want to be buried, where they want to be buried, and all those things. It's just a lot to ending a life. There's a lot involved.
That's right. Or if you're cremated, where those ashes are going to end up exactly on a fireplace someplace or sprinkled into the ocean. So those are all things that ought to be thought about.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about the many kinds of legacy. So yeah, the practical stuff, like we just mentioned, also wills and passwords, funeral plans, but also emotional and spiritual legacy. So, Dad, we've discussed doing these different lists, right? So there's a must-do list, a should-do list, and a could-do list for this transition. So why don't you explain quickly the difference between the three lists?
A must-do, a should-do, a could-do. And we've kind of organized it this way because it is a long list. That's what we just said. And I think to put it in, if you will, digestible bites, we've tiered it so that you have a starting place. And that gives you an opportunity to begin this process, whether it's for you or conversations that you might have with an aging parent or grandparent.
Perfect. Okay, so let's start with the must do. What are the things you are kind of non-negotiable, things you have to do as you're preparing for this?
Well, on this part of the list, we have decided that a last will and testament, often with a trust or within a trust, advance directives, which include powers of attorney, limitations to care, such as do not resuscitate if your heart stops, feeding desires if you can't swallow anymore, do you want to be put on a breathing machine if your breathing is labored? Those sorts of things, Michelle, need to be on this must-do list.
Okay, so I know, even as someone who's not facing any kind of end-of-life issues at the moment, my doctor will ask about this, if I have a DNR or have a, was it power of attorney or power of something? So if my loved one has had that conversation with their doctor, but not me, when they're in that situation, will the hospital share with me what their plan was so we know, or how does that work?
Well, it's not always available. Hospitals and clinics now have to ask by regulation, do you have these documents and have you given them to us? And that is just part of the process when you check into the hospital or an appointment. Now, are those documents still retrievable within that system? Did they get lost in some electronic system? That's why you should always have a backup. But those things may have been done some time ago and they've been refreshed and not updated. So it's certainly worth making sure that these things have been accomplished in the most contemporary version as in your system, if there is a system.
Okay, so that really falls on the patient to make sure that that's there. Then, I'm thinking of that myself, the adult child caring possibly for an elderly parent. If that hasn't been expressed to me, you're saying I might not necessarily have access to that record in the moment that those decisions need to be made. So that's something you need to talk about.
Absolutely, because you may have been given, like we would have given you, our power of attorney for healthcare decision making. And if it's an emergency situation, there are paramedics there, or you're in an emergency room, and those documents aren't easily retrievable, you should be knowledgeable as that next person along the line to know what my wishes or your loved one's wishes are.
Okay. So that's just really kind of the basic humanity thing that you need to do. You need to have your assets in order with a will and a testament. You don't necessarily have to tell us what's on it. It's not a must do, but you need to have that in order. And then this you need to have as well. Just out of curiosity, are you willing to share kind of what your plans are, and what you would like?
Yeah, we said in an earlier episode that physicians and nurses are designed as healers and fixers. So if those documents aren't there, the default is always let's do everything possible. So that's why it's so important to do this, because if you would like just to naturally slide into the next life, we wouldn't want to be doing things to you that were outside of what you originally planned. Yeah, like for me, if it looks like I have a reversible problem, let's say I develop a pneumonia and it appears temporarily I'm going to need some respiratory support to get me through that pneumonia, then sure, short term being on a breathing machine or a ventilator, I would be supportive of that. But if I have advanced lung cancer, there's really no hope for my survival. I'm really in a care and comfort mode, and I start to lose my ability to breathe on my own. Absolutely no tube. Just give me a little extra medicine and let me drift off into the arms of of God.
I'm gonna cry. I hate that thinking about that, but it's good to know that. But that would be so hard in the moment because you would just you'd want to fight to keep you there as long as you can, but you need to honor wishes. Okay, so those are and again, this must do and should do. We're gonna touch on these, but these are kind of the things that you already know as listeners, hopefully, these things. So we're going to get through these so we can get onto the other
And a
stuff.
lot of good resources out there to go deeper on these.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so then should do. Why don't you talk about what we have on our should do list?
Well, we start with funeral planning. And again, what do you want to have done with your body? Do you want it to be buried in a traditional casket? Or are you like a growing number of people in North America who would prefer to be cremated? Back in the 1950s, that was only 5%. It's now almost 61%.
No way.
From the most recent data. Part of it's economic. It's a little bit cheaper than a traditional burial service. And then I think just some people find the expediency of that helpful. And maybe perhaps they're going to have a future memorial service and all the family has to come in. So rather than having the body sort of refrigerated for a month, they will go ahead and do a cremation. So a lot of things. There's no biblical reason that we can find, and other theologians would not argue that one is better than the other. So you do have that option. But that's something that some forethought to. It's why it's on our should-do list. And if you're advancing this concept, it's also nice to have picked out a funeral home. My wife and I, when I retired a couple of years ago, went ahead and not only picked out the funeral home, we prepaid for our entire funeral, picked out the casket and all those things. So that's one less thing you have to deal with at that point. Assuming you have a home church or a special environment where you'd want a pastor or a clergyman to be able to memorialize you in a church service, you should think of that. Those of us who are a little more got the planning gene.
One.
Again, not to be overly morbid about this, but I've kind of picked out what hymns that I would prefer to be sung at my memorial in the future, as well as who might be able to bring the message of the hope that lies within me, where I will actually be at that particular moment.
You've picked the person or the type of person that you want?
Yeah, the type of person, because, this year I know who that would be, but that person, I may outlive that person. So, I have a general guideline for you guys to follow.
Do they know?
No, they don't.
You're like, just so you know, sir, you can't die before me because you're speaking for me. Oh, my goodness.
Well, some of the other things on our should-do list, and this is one that people tend to forget, is passwords and account information. I was talking with somebody earlier today just about the fact that, with everything that's electronic, checking accounts and IRAs and, our Google accounts, whatever that looks like, I think I have 40 or so passwords. They're all different, right? And so I know what they are, and a lot of them are automated based on my Face ID.
Yes.
But, if I went down, would you know how to access some of that stuff that you need to access? So having duplicate passwords, having your family know where those are, what your account information is, making sure that banking and checking accounts particularly are, depending on the state you're listening to this in, there are different rules on joint property law, but you want to make sure all those accounts, if you're married, are joint accounts. So
Mm-hmm.
there's fluidity basically between who can move in and out of those accounts, because as soon as somebody dies, the surviving spouse is going to need some access to resources for various things, and you want to make sure that there's not some substantial hassle there.
So, quick question about, like, I know where your passwords are. You showed me, and if for whatever reason I wanted to get into your accounts now, I could. There's nothing
Absolutely.
to hide,
Yeah.
right? But what about the person who really doesn't want anyone to have access right now? You could leave that with an attorney, I would assume, that
Yeah.
information. Okay, as long
You
as you
could
don't
leave it
change
with
the passwords.
That's right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Even that long lost forgotten, what are they called? The boxes at the
Oh,
bank?
safe deposit
Deposit
box.
boxes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Ooh.
right. Yeah, recently went and
Mysterious.
checked one I hadn't looked into for 10 years.
You
Took my
took,
grandson
yes.
with it, and he didn't know what they were. So we had a nice little educational session.
What was in it?
There was nothing in it, but he and I put a $10 bill in it. So he'd remember to go look at it after I pass.
That's amazing. Okay. Well, and then the other thing we have on that list, just to mention too, is contact information for attorneys or financial planners.
Yes, exactly. And to know what sequence. I know my attorney, our attorney, my wife and I, who has created our documents, our trust, last will and testament, those things, reminds us, though, you might want to call your financial advisor first. It's much better to always touch base with your attorney first, so they can make sure that all of these I's are dotted and T's are crossed, so that as we move through the whole process of avoiding probate, hopefully, and getting access to Social Security information, all that other stuff is done in the right sequence, so there's no inadvertent penalty.
Well, like you said, this is all the must do and should do. And I was speaking with a friend of mine who's my same like age range, and she's lost one parent. One parent is still living, and this is about where they go, where she's comfortable going as far as conversation. She's like, I have the attorney's business card, and I don't really want to talk about anything else with my mom. Like, I know where that is. Her mom wants to have more conversations with her, but I think because she lost her dad, she's just not quite emotionally ready for that. But this is the checkbox. Okay. So if you've done these things, it's really kind of what you need to do, must and should do. But we really want to take more time now to talk about the things that you could do. And we have this list. Dad, you've put this list together. Really, this is a gift. These are the things that you can do above and beyond that will be a blessing and leaving a legacy behind as you pass, and that your family is going through that.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And just bouncing off that example of your friend, we're being careful here. Everybody's on their own journey where they are emotionally. And so we haven't put time frames into this. We've just tried to segregate it for you to think about. The must-dos really, once you're in adulthood, particularly if you're a parent and you're married, those must-dos got to be nailed, even if you're in your 40s. Yeah. And as time goes on, I'm in my early 70s, the should-dos and the could-dos become increasingly relevant. So it's things that I'm comfortable now doing that perhaps 25 years ago I wouldn't have been. Mm-hmm. But yeah, on this could-do list, let's just talk about that for a moment. Personal letters. I just think it's such a special and very poignant opportunity on this side of the grave to have written a personal letter to each of the people in my life that's been special. My wife, my daughter, you, Michelle, your husband, each of my 2 grandchildren, on what a gift you've been in my life, how I see God's uniquely designed you, what I see as God's plan for you going forward. And I've been doing that for a number of years. Every few years I dust them off because life changes and I rewrite them. Or actually what I've done, I've actually left the original and I've just redated it. And it's sort of like an ongoing journal story to each person. That's just me, but that's one thing to think about. Can
you imagine? You brought me one time. Mom was on a trip, and I came up to visit you at the house or something, and you brought me into where the safe is, and you opened up the safe, and you were kind of like, you do this, everyone, listeners. My dad has done this for years. Every once in a while, just reminds me where the safe is, what the code is, all that stuff. But you opened it up, and you were showing me where all the stuff was, and I had never seen. I saw those envelopes with our names on them, and I just broke down. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that they were multiple versions in there. My gosh, that's going to be, it's going to be awful, but also amazing.
But a gift.
It's
a gift.
Yeah,
it's a gift. How about your stuff? For so many of us, even if we aren't, pack rats. We tend to accumulate a lot of stuff as life goes on. And most of that stuff is of only curiosity value at best and junk to those that are behind us. And so, the best you can, and for some of us, this takes a little more fortitude than for others, is really thinking about purging. Are some of those things in your closet, or some of those things that have been precious to you, really need to move on? I know I recently talked to somebody who's making a commitment that 10 items a week they're taking to Goodwill. They're about my age, and they're just disciplining themselves, whether it's clothing or shoes or whatever it is. They have a process for decluttering. And I think that's a great idea or a model. So that's one thing to be thinking about. Another part of that is there are some things that are probably going to be very, very special to your heirs that you want to earmark to them and put their name on, if you will. You can do that in your will often. There's a place for that you by hand can write that my golf clubs are going to my son-in-law. But some of those other precious pieces of jewelry or memorabilia, maybe that have been passed on for a couple of generations, it's very nice to sort of have a place for that. I know when my mom died 30 years ago, she hadn't done this, and my two siblings and I kind of went around with Post-its on, I want this, and that'll sometimes work. It feels a little bit like a flea market approach.
Yeah,
so
like a estate sale in your own parents' house. Yeah,
exactly. So I think a little forethought to that's very helpful. And that would include, of course, physical and electronic things. Prepaying expenses, I mentioned that earlier.
Back up for just a second.
Yeah.
Because we have the note on here for electronic, because nowadays, with all the digital photography and videos and all that, there could be an overwhelming amount of data that your children will have to sort through. And so when you're purging and when you're thinking about those shoes that no one's going to want, or that sweater that's outdated, there's also going to be, do you really need to save all those files that you have on, Word documents, or the photos? Dad, you've been going through and getting some photos digitized, and you were even saying as you're going through these photos, like which ones should we actually even spend the money to get digitized? Because do people even want to see these repetitive images? And only you can answer that, or talking to me about that. But that's another thing that really should be considered while you have your mental capacity and the ability to make those decisions, to not only think about the physical things that you're leaving behind, but also whatever you have electronic or digital that you could cull and purge and make that easier on your family too. I can edit. That's like my thing. That's like one of my only talents.
Oh,
this is where you're supposed to say I have more talent.
You have more talent than that. I'm editing your comment.
Thank you. But editing is something I do, and so I'm the one that always gets pegged to edit the highlight reel, for the funerals.
Yes.
I'm the one who, my mom has. She's one of 5 kids, and when her parents each passed, I got so many emails with photos, attachments from all the siblings to make this video. Golly, wouldn't it be nice for the person in your family who does the editing to have that ready to go maybe earlier, and maybe you get to pick it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just saying.
Your own highlight reel.
Yeah.
I love it, and I can even remember, I think it was for your grandmother's funeral, you were collecting all these things, and then you had the whole thing done, and then somebody with 30 minutes out finally wanted to have something out of you, thinking, what were you thinking?
Yeah, we are not doing this during the funeral service. That ship has sailed, friend. These are our must do, should do, and could do. So this is not a comprehensive list. And maybe as you're listening, you're thinking, I have something this should be on the must do list, or this is something maybe we didn't talk about that we could add to the could do list. So if you have ideas, or you have questions, or anything you think we should add, we do have a contact form linked in our show notes. So you can always contact us there. We're going to have this extra episode at the end of our little mini series where we address those things and talk about things that maybe we overlooked. But we're going to move on from our little list here, because we do have a little bit more time in this episode, and we want to talk about spiritual legacy. So we're going to move on to that now. And Dad, this aspect is something that you really wanted to address, particularly because of some unfortunate scenarios that you have witnessed.
Yes, it's really a shame, as I think back over my clinical career, as well as just my life as an adult, where you see relationships that have been fractured because of a misunderstanding or a crossword that goes unreconciled, gets into a level of bitterness, and one person feels the other person should apologize, and vice versa. And then it unfortunately gets played out either after death or on a deathbed situation. And it's sad.
There was a book that you've read in your research on this that had 4 things that matter most is the name of the book, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll have this in the show notes. It's a great read. It's a layman's perspective, but it's written by a physician who spent a career doing what we would say is palliative and hospice care. And over the course of 30 years, really was able to boil down to 4 essential phrases that really help reconcile sometimes what seems unreconcilable. And those include, please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, I love you. Terrific book, terrific thinking, lots of wonderful stories, both of this going well and the consequences of it not going well.
Okay, so that the way you said that was interesting. So stories of this going well, which will make us all feel good, but then of not doing this and having the consequence of living with the not being forgiven, or not giving forgiveness, or saying, I love you. Or
And we hear this all the time when people, if we know they're going to be passing away, or even if they die suddenly, oh, I wish I had seen them one more time, or I wish I had kissed them that morning as they went to work, or I wish we hadn't had an argument the night before. And these things happen, and God is gracious and merciful, and yet that might be a burden you might be carrying. So that opportunity to keep short accounts, be very grace-based, is very important.
Right. And we all know difficult people. And we all have had relationships with people who are difficult. And that might be your parent, or that might be your child who is the difficult one. And it's difficult to have these conversations with them. The reason we're bringing it up is not because we're therapists or counselors, but because this is part of the recipe of dying well. This is, part of what you need to do to die well. So we need to think about this, having these conversations as part of your legacy. And if you are the elderly parent who is passing, to grant forgiveness, to have these conversations, to give those family members a chance to talk to you well before you're at death's door. Or if you are a child of an elderly parent and you're looking to break generational sin or cycles of not being good communicators or offering forgiveness, this is an opportunity for you to start that legacy in your generation. So really it's about selflessness versus selfishness. And while these aren't comfortable situations, they are vitally important to this transition going well.
So well said. And I heard somebody recently say that we're really writing our obituary every day of our life. I certainly don't want to be remembered 50 years from now as that bitter old man who couldn't say I'm sorry or I forgive you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've covered a lot in this episode. And if someone is listening and feeling overwhelmed by all of this, Dad, what is one small step that they could take this week to start preparing?
Well, from that could-do list, that personal letter. Now, you might not write that letter, but perhaps you could list 2 or 3 people that you want to write that letter to. I'll tell you, having done it, it's hard. There's a lot of tears, but it's a courageous step just to say, I want to make sure these 3 people hear from me in writing before I go.
I think that's good. We can come up with a list of 3 people. So my advice to my generation would be, is there one tangible item that you think would be special to your parent, and asking them what their plans are for it? So for Dad, for example, you went to VMI, very proud Virginia Military Institute grad. You have this gorgeous class ring that you wear for special occasions. And I know Kenton has his eye on it, my son. Is that something you would like to leave him?
Absolutely. It's going to have his name on it, and I'll make sure that's in our last will and testament.
Great. So just asking that question, hey, I've noticed that my son really loves that ring that you have. Have you thought about which grandchild will have that when you pass one day? Great. We've said it, but let's just, hey, Dad, have you put that in writing? And then that could lend into a conversation about many of the other things we've talked about today. So let that just be a little tidbit on how to start that conversation.
We're not meant to do any of this alone. In our next episode, we're going to discuss how communities can surround the sick, the dying, and their caregivers with compassion and presence. We'll even chat about how an Oscar-winning actor's death brings this into sobering focus.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Is there someone on your mind as you listen to this podcast? Maybe it's someone you wish you could have these conversations with? Well, let us help. Send them the link to this podcast and set a date to chat about what's been said before the buzzer.